Hi, I'm Kelly Drake. Welcome to Art on the Brain. And today we're going to paint some really beautiful primroses in watercolor. I'm going to show you how to do this step by step. But first I wanted to tell you about a free download I have for my subscribers and anyone else who wishes to do this. This is a Mother's Day card I made out of this painting, and it's a free download on my website. So look for instructions down below in the description and download that and print it out for free and give it to your mom for Mother's Day. So happy spring, happy Mother's Day, and enjoy painting some spring flowers with me. So to add interest in the background, I've decided to use a resist technique and create kind of a squiggly pattern back there. Right now I'm just using a white crayon and just reinforcing some of those lines that I've already drawn. I like to keep my crayon sharp so that I just get the same width of lines, and so I use my Stettler pencil sharpener there to sharpen it. Now I'm using some masking fluid to mask out the primroses, which you might be able to see the light drawing that I've done down at the bottom of the page. And first I like to use some soft soap, especially if I'm using a little bit nicer brush, which I'm using this time so that I can get those edges and everything nice and crisp on the edge. So I used a little bit extra soap on my wet brush to protect it, so that when I go to wash my brush after I'm done with the masking fluid, I can get all that masking fluid out of the brush. I'm just going to cover the entire area where I have the primroses drawn so that I can protect it when I paint the background. I don't want to deal with trying to leave all those little edges and details when I'm painting the background. So now it's dry, and I'm just putting on a quinacridone gold watercolor wash. And I apologize, not everyone can get this exact color. You can still buy Daniel Smith quinacridone gold, although the pigment has changed because this particular pigment's no longer available. It's somewhat close, and if you're interested in the color quinacridone gold and how to get that, try to get as close as you can to this older version of the color. Look on YouTube, there's a couple good videos on that. So now I'm just removing the masking fluid. It's a little harder to remove than usual, and I think that's because I put a little extra soap in my brush. So if you use an old brush, you can just put a little bit of soap in. It works really well. This is fine. It's just a little harder to remove than usual, but it did protect the paper, and I really didn't get much bleed through except that one little spot down on the right. So the masking fluid's now removed, and I'm going to start putting in little flower details, and I like to start with the color that I'm going to repeat from the background, so to make sure that that's repeated and that it goes through, takes your eye through the page. So the center of the flowers has a really nice gold color, just like I used on the background. And each little area I'm wetting with some clear water and then going in with a small fine tip brush and putting the gold in, and so that it bleeds on the edges and looks a little more natural. And the water stops at that little circle in the center so that there's a little harder edge there, just like it is in the flower. Now I took two different primroses actually to do this painting. Oh, there's the there's the one I took the design from. I liked the way the flowers lay on this plant better than the other one, and the other one got a little trashed out in the rain. Unfortunately, we had a little more rain this spring than usual. So although I like the color on the first one, I'm using the second one more for the design. So now it's time to do a Grisaille Underpainting. If you're unfamiliar with this term, I refer to using a Grisaille Underpainting as doing a monochromatic value painting underneath everything else. So with watercolor, I find that this cerulean blue works really well for Grisaille, and it gives me a chance to do some of the details and the light and shadow and to just get that in a monochromatic way so that I don't really have to worry about color at this point. Once you get to color, it's kind of difficult to get your values right. So sometimes it's nice to get your values, your lights and your darks and your middle tones, and then paint over the top, and you know already where you've decided where the darks and lights go. And then you can always go in with your other colors and work on them a little more and change things a little bit. But this is where you really get your values set. So I'm just deciding where I want a little bit of texture, where I want some shadow, where I want to leave white. Now, leaving white at this point is very important, because if you lose your white here, it's gone forever, pretty much. You can lift some, but it's never really the same if you don't leave it at this point. So I'm leaving a lot of white, and maybe in the end I might cover it up with a little bit of color here and there, but that will leave that color brighter than it would be otherwise if it was going over the blue. So I'm really only using the blue where I want to make sure to have some shadow underneath and some depth. Leaving plenty of white so that some areas can be white and some areas can be a nice bright green color. Now I'm going to use the same process on the flowers and just kind of show where I have some of those petals overlying the other petals, so that there's a shadow that shows you that one is lying over the top of the other. Now these primroses are very flat kind of flowers, so there's not a ton of depth to them. So I think these little shadows are very important so that they don't look completely flat. There's quite a lot of depth to the leaves, and as you see throughout the process, I'll be working on those to make sure that the shadows draw you in, and that the light areas on the edges of the flowers and the leaves take you also out to the edges of the plant. Now here already you can start to see the three-dimensional plant kind of come to life. And so now I'm going to start with an anthracite red from Daniel Smith and just start laying in some of the color on the outside of the petals. Now I'm going with the coloring a little closer to the plant on the top there, so I want to leave some white between the red on the outside of the petals and the gold color on the inside. And I'm letting that grisaille painting below show through the red, and that will give you a little bit of your shading right from the start without having to do much more than just put a transparent layer over the top. Now I don't know if you've had a chance to see my video on how to paint realistic clouds, but this is a very similar technique to what I used in that video. So I'm wetting the area of each petal and being very careful to leave a little bit of white on the outside there, because I want a little bit of that white edge that you can kind of see, especially on the flowers below. I think that's really beautiful and will help to separate the flowers in the later painting. But then, like my cloud painting, I'm wetting the area, putting in some color toward the edge, and then wetting it again toward the inside of the petal with some clear water, and then blotting it out with a little bit of toilet paper. So I get that very nice, soft, gradated edge toward the inside of the flower. So I just keep a whole roll of toilet paper close by, and that way I can tear off little pieces and use them as I want to. Now while I'm painting, because this is kind of a fast process while it dries, I'm not going to worry where all these little pieces of toilet paper go. I'm just kind of throwing them wherever, and then I'll clean up at the end. And you don't need a lot, just a tiny little piece, and you can dab it and get out that little bit of excess water and paint so that you keep that white toward the center of the flower. And I don't like to reuse the little pieces of toilet paper that I've already used before, because I don't want to get any of the paint that I've dabbed off of one of the flowers onto the next one. I want a nice clean piece of tissue so that I get that white that I want, and I don't have to worry about getting old paint over the new. Now it's time to put some green over that grisaille painting on the leaves. And what I'm noticing here is that I'm losing my detail that I painted below. And that's really unusual because I usually use my cerulean blue from Daniel Smith, and this is my old tube on the left. When I got my new tube of cerulean blue, I realized it was acting quite a bit different from the old blue. And this is why I'm having problems with this green going over the top and hiding all the details. See, what I noticed is the new cerulean blue has a different pigment number 35 versus number 36. So what I really needed was the new cerulean blue chromium, and that would have given me the effect that I'm used to. I hate it when they change the names of these colors and don't tell you, but that's just a word of caution there, that when you're buying new paint and you want to replace a color that you've been using for a long time, make sure to check the pigment number, which is usually in tiny, tiny print on the back of the tube. So this cerulean blue disappeared under that green, so I'm going to have to be a little more careful when I paint that. And so I blotted out that upper layer of green that I started with. I'm going to go over that again in a little bit. First, I'm going to put this second layer of color over the flower petals, and right now I'm using a quinacridone violet to make a little more of a violet or pinkish cast to those petals and also give them a little more depth. It's always good to use at least two colors so that you get more depth to your color and it's not just one. So now I'm back to the leaves. And I'm using two different greens here, because if you look at the plant on the left, you can see that there's some blue greens and there's some yellow greens. And I have these two great, very natural looking greens for this that I like to use. They're both from Daniel Smith, and one is called olive green, and that's the more yellowish green that you're seeing there. And the little bit darker areas there with the blue green is called undersea green. Also, now that some of these petals have dried, I'm going to touch up the petals, or put a second layer on the petals that I haven't done that with yet with the quinacridone violet. These dry brush watercolor paintings, you really have to go back and forth a lot, because as you're waiting for one area to dry, you can work on another area. So sometimes it doesn't really look like it makes sense. You're working on one area, then you skip to something else, then you come back. And it's just so that you let those adjacent areas dry so it doesn't bleed into the next area and kind of ruin the painting. So I'm looking at basically each one of these little petals, each leaf is basically a little painting of its own and has its own area to do a wet and wet wash or a wet on dry wash. And you do that in several layers until you're finally finished. So right now I am putting some more pigment in where I want the darks and leaving it lighter out on the edges where it gets into the white area. And just doing that a little bit now, and then later on I'll work on that some more with mixed neutral so it looks even more like a shadow, but right now just doing it with the green that I have. Now in looking at this plant, I'm seeing the green leaves are very bright. In fact, all the colors are so bright on these primroses they almost don't look real. They almost don't look natural. So looking at my leaves, they're looking a little pale, a little anemic in comparison. So I'm mixing a yellowy green here that's even a little brighter than what I had. A little less natural even. And I used some phthalo green and I mixed in some green gold. And that's giving it a much brighter, almost unnatural green look. Although I'm not going the complete unnatural green because I don't want it to just, I don't want it to look unnatural on the page, and I don't want it to fight with the red of the primroses, because what I really want to be the star here are the flowers. So as you can see, that layer of yellowish green over the top is really bringing it to life and making it look a lot more like the plant on the left. Now I want to mix my neutrals, so I'm taking my reds and my greens. That's the phthalo green, this is the undersea green, and the olive green there. And I'm going to mix them in a separate pan. And on the left you see a neutral green, and on the right you see a neutral red. And that's from mixing different amounts of those greens and reds that I just showed you to get a neutral. And because green and red are complements, you're going to get a variety of different kinds of neutrals, which are either a little more red, a little more green, and somewhere between those colors and kind of a gray or a brown color. So those are going to make really nice colors for you to use in your shadows. And it's really kind of amazing. Right now you don't see a ton happening, but as you go you really see a much more natural look happen when you add these neutrals into your shaded areas. Unfortunately, when I did the neutrals and the shadows on the green of the leaves here, the camera wasn't working, so I missed that. But if you look before, rewind a little bit and look at before and then now, you can see that there's a little more depth to the leaves and they look a little more natural. So now this wax that's around the plant, I'm thinking might be a little bit problematic when I'm trying to put in some shading. Definitely won't be able to shade with just watercolors. So I erased some of that wax off with a pencil eraser. And now I'm going to go in with my watercolor pencils. I'm just going to try to pick the right color here. Something that's similar to that gold in the background, but maybe just a little tone darker. And I found something as close to yellow ochre or a dark gold color. And I'm taking this watercolor pencil and dipping it in water and then just creating some similar strokes in the background between the white squiggly lines. There, I'm dipping it in the water again just to get more pigment to come off the pencil and also to get a little more of a varied line. When you dip these in water, they're much more buttery and they spread a lot nicer than when you just dry on the paper. And this paper is a cold press, although it's not super rough, it's a little bit rough, and so to get a nice smooth line really helps to get them wet and to press kind of hard as you go down on the paper. And I like having the variety of the lights and darks and the middle values back there, but still repeating that pattern and to give it some texture. So now I'm just going over with a small brush and a little water to blend them a little more. Now I'm going to use my wax-based colored pencils. These are just Prismacolor Premier pencils to work on the shadow around the plant. And first I'm going over with a very similar color to what's in the background, just to kind of go over some of those white areas. And I should mention that the reason I'm using the wax pencils for this is because I've already got wax in the background with that crayon, even though I tried to take some of it off with a pencil eraser, and it's a lot of it rubbed off. Then the wax pencils will go over the little bit of wax that's left over there and it won't resist that wax pencil. So I can do this shadow right over the top of that pattern and I won't have any gaps or weird looking spots that I would probably have if I tried to use watercolor pencils here. So this is truly a mixed media piece using wax resist, wax-based pencils, watercolor pencils, and pure watercolor. So now I just want to create a little bit more depth here and have a little shadow around and within the plant. So I'm kind of using it, this is a black grape color, which I love because it's a great shadow color for these flowers. It's a little bit of the quinacridone violet, as if you had mixed it with its complement and created a little bit of a neutral tone with that color. and it makes a nice complement to the gold. So now I just decided I wanted those flowers a little more pink. So tested a couple pinks and decided on this color, and just adding a little bit over the top here. The red was still, to me, falling a little flat, and I wanted to add some of that really nice pink tone that's in the flowers that I was using as a reference. It just makes it look more springy. So now going around with that lighter pink, it has a tiny bit of white pigment in it so that it goes over the top of that watercolor. And now using a really bright lemon yellow to lighten the area in the middle there too, because I really like that bright yellow that's in the flowers. Now back to the black grape, just kind of going around those centers of the flowers and making those look like there's a little depth there. And now I believe I have a violet pencil that I'm going around again in that shadow and re-emphasizing the dark areas and the gradated color that goes out. And now again with the dark brown. And because the light was from above, there's not a huge drop shadow, there's just a little bit of shadow all around the plant so that you see that it's kind of coming out from the background. Now I'm using that same brown in the shadows of the leaves, just to create a little more of that neutral feeling where the shadows are, where they disappear there below the flowers. And so now I'm finished and very happy with this painting, and it was really a fun painting to do, and I hope you give this a try at home with some of your beautiful spring flowers. And remember to go to my website and download your free version of this Mother's Day card. All the instructions are below in the description. And now don't forget to subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this, and stop by and check out my webpage, my Facebook page, or take a look at my Instagram account if you'd like to learn more about me, my art, and my children's book illustrations.